News Matters. And today we asked our friends from Harvard's Berkman Center to kind of fill us in on the work they're doing. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the co-sponsorship of the Donors Forum Chicago Youth Task Force, which is joining us today, including some of their members that include Street Level, Free Spirit, DePaul University, the Social Impact Research Center, and Florida Gulf Coast. Some of these folks are McCormick grantees, others are interested in applying to Why News Matters, still others are Donors Forum members. We also have some guests of the Berkman Center, including staff members from the Toronto Public Library System and a couple of universities. We also have representatives from the Stone Foundation, Media Democracy Fund, and others. I'd now like to turn it over to our colleagues from the Berkman Center. Urs Gasser is the Executive Director, and his Crackerjack team of Sandra Cortese and Nathaniel Levy. Urs?
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to co-host this webinar. It's actually my first webinar, you can't believe it, on youth and information quality online. I'm here together with a room full of youth and media team members. I will introduce them later on in the course of this session. But before we start, I just wanted to make sure that everyone actually has a whiteboard with the first slide in front of you. If not, please send a text or actually a chat message. You can send an instant message. If you look at your left side, just below the participants window, you have a window where you can, type in any message to all participants in case you have technical troubles. We have a technician here on the team that will then respond to you. Now, the same chat functionality can also be used when you have questions. We have one person actually monitoring the chat, so that's one way to weigh in, comment on the presentation, but also, of course, ask questions. Another way to actually participate in this webinar is if you look at this on the same left side of your screen, just below participants, you see a hand like this with a little arrow there, a green arrow. You can press this button, and then we can give you the mic remotely and invite again your questions and comments. So I hope you're all set on the tech front and can get started with actually a brief look at the agenda. Over the next half an hour or so, we would like to do a couple of things. First, I would like to start with a brief introduction of the Youth and Media Project here at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. Then, and that of course will be the core of today's conversation, provide an overview of a recent report that we released on youth and information quality. We'll have various team members actually presenting portions of the report and sharing also open questions and thoughts for discussion. In the third step then, we would like to carve out time actually for an open debate and open question. What are some of the implications, reviewing the report, looking at some of our core findings with regard to news. There is much more research to be done, and we all count on you as experts to help us actually frame the debate and think about some of the implications as applied to news as one specific and particularly important, of course, type of information. We'll then have some additional slides, if we have time, to talk a little bit about next steps and ways in which we think we can address the information quality challenge online. So that's the rough game plan. I hope that sounds roughly right to all of you. Otherwise, weigh in, please, and stop me and any of my team members at any moment if you go too fast or if you're speaking too slow. We're here to, we're happy to receive your feedback at any moment. So let me start with this picture of the Youth and Media team and talk a little bit about the Youth and Media Lab here at the Berkman Center. So what is this Youth and Media Lab about? In short, think of it as a research and development lab for media literacy and digital empowerment. The lab was founded in January of last year and made possible through a generous grant of the McCormick Foundation, for which we're deeply grateful, of course, and brings together young people from, I would say, high school age typically. We also have some younger folks, but typically high school folks up to PhDs, to work together with researchers here at Harvard, but also other members of the Berkman community to creatively engage with some of the core challenges and opportunities that youth today face online. Now there are a couple of obvious areas of work for such a lab. Think about cyberbullying and risky behavior online, but also, for instance, privacy challenges, where we have so many open questions that are of great concern to us as educators, but also parents, of course, and mentors of young people. So these are some of the work areas. But over the past 1.5 years in particular, we have focused on an area that is the topic of today's webinar that we think has actually been underexplored, both from a research side as well as from a practice side, and that is information quality. And we will, of course, explain in some greater detail what we mean by that over the next few minutes. Now, just let me describe in some broad strokes what the lab's activities are. We're actually, our activities are roughly divided into 3 tracks. The first is a track, the research track, where we do, together with our young team members, interviews with other young people, focus group interviews, one-to-one interviews, with the goal essentially to better understand the online practices of teenagers in particular, but also kids more generally. Now, part of this research track is also engagement with literature, and the report we are going to present in a few minutes is actually one of the outcomes of this research track of the Youth and Media Lab. So it's not only about doing interviews, but also, of course, doing more traditional academic work. Based on that work, and kind of the theoretical foundation laid in this research track, we are excited about curriculum development, and that's really where I think the beauty of the lab becomes visible. So what we're trying to do, and have worked on over the past 1.5 years, is not only to produce papers, but be helpful to teachers and educators in various settings of learning, be it formal settings or informal settings, such as after schools, for instance, and work together with young kids here at the lab to develop teaching modules that can be used and that are exciting for young people to engage with questions, as I mentioned, around information quality and credibility by way of example. So it's the second track is the curriculum development track, where we work also with teachers from the region. We have a great collaboration with Jean Rosenberg at Paris College, also she's also part of the McCormick network, and maybe we have time towards the end to talk a little bit more about this curriculum development work. It's particularly exciting because it's really bringing kids to the design table when we do curriculum development, and also use some of the power of peer learning and peer teaching, where it's actually not adults crafting educational modules for youth, but actually youth themselves engaging in such activities. So the third and final track, actually, that's the least developed currently. That's more the ambition for the future. In addition to creating curricula, also to develop tools. Think of them as navigation aids for cyberspace, which would help young users in particular successfully navigate the internet, assist them in making quality judgments, say, of online news. That's very much at the beginning of that kind of area of activity, but I think, again, it's a very exciting idea as we move forward, and kind of fun for everyone involved, for sure. So with that brief introduction, and of course you would find more on our website about the lab at www.youthandmedia.org. With that, I would like to now focus a little bit on the context of this report that we're about to present here. That can be downloaded from SSRN. I provided on the slide you see a link down there on which you can click, of course, and download the roughly 120 pages long report. So what is this report about? I think the basic question that we seek to address is really to understand how do we even think about information quality in this digital environment on the one hand side and in the youth context on the other, given some of the fundamental changes we have seen as we move from an analog paper world to a fully digitally networked environment. Of course, for instance, we all know that we have no longer the same gatekeepers in place that guarantee certain levels of information quality. Today, of course, you don't need to own a printing press, or you don't need to go through an editorial review to publish something on a blog, even if the thing that you publish may have a deep impact on the reader potentially. One example would be health information or financial information. So the point is well known, of course. Traditional gatekeepers and levelers of information quality have disappeared, and new gatekeepers and new intermediaries such as search engines have entered the field. Now, our main research question was originally how in such an environment that is so much more diverse, has more speakers, has a broader range of content from the very valuable to the more troublesome, how do we actually even conceptualize and think about credibility and the idea of quality of information? Now, why do we contextualize this research question by looking at youth practice as well? In some ways, youth has a particular challenge to make information quality judgments, although, of course, youth share a lot of things in common with adults. But one of the problems, of course, is that youth are often less well equipped, even psychologically and from a brain development perspective, to make determinations about quality and assess risks appropriately. So, looking at youth practices, and that's based on the research we've done previously, we really got interested in how do young people search, evaluate, but also create information online, and how does that together shape their information quality experience on the net. So these have been kind of the two top-level questions, and motivated, of course, by a particular area of application, as I noted previously, and that is what are the implications for news, for the news environment, when we take a close look at today's youth online behavior as it relates to quality. Longer term, the guiding question is what are the necessary skills and literacies that are needed that we need to build, to teach, that empower youth to successfully navigate the internet and make sound decisions. As we know, the internet has become the primary source of information for many young people, and therefore we think it's a very important question to ask: how do we empower them to really make smart decisions, to be able to evaluate critically different sources of information? What are the points of intervention from an educational perspective? These are some of the bigger picture questions we hope we can answer over time and experiment with as we move forward. And our literature review that we're going to present now in some detail hopes to lay the foundation for such work. Now, my pleasure actually to turn over to Meredith Beaton, who's a RA on our team, a research assistant. What I described is rather theoretical, and Meredith actually is not only a terrific researcher, she's also a teacher, a middle school teacher, and she will give you now a much more concrete, practical example of what I just described in theoretical terms. With that, over to you, Meredith.
Thank you, Art. Okay. All right. So, as Art said, that was a lot of theory, but what does this look like in practice? So, my students and I, a few weeks ago, they decided that they wanted to hold a bake sale in order to raise some money for Heifer International. We're trying to buy an ARC, actually, which is about $5,000. It's a lot of money. They decided they wanted to have this bake sale, and they wanted to test out some recipes before we sold to a wider audience. Great plan. So, one of my students was in charge of finding a recipe for chocolate cupcakes. And so he went to Google, and he typed in best chocolate cupcake recipe, because those included all of the search terms he wanted to find. And he found this great website called Cupcakes Take the Cake. And they had this beautiful picture of chocolate cupcakes. They looked delicious. My student said, oh my gosh, these must be great. And they decided to bake them in advance. And so we made them about 3 weeks ago now. And they came out of the oven. They looked beautiful. We all tested one, and students immediately practically spit them out of their mouths and said, oh my gosh, this is disgusting. They were salty. They weren't very chocolatey. It was not a very good day for us. And so we went back to the website later, and we looked at it, and we scrolled all the way down to the bottom, which my student had not originally done. And we started looking at it, and we found some comments that said, oh, these cupcakes are the biggest flop ever. Don't ever make these. And we found other people who said, actually, these are the best cupcakes ever. I love them. So easy to make. And it was a perfect example of how sort of this idea of what is important or what is good to some people online can be really horrendous to other people online, and it's really a personal judgment situation. So we talked about how you can go to these recipe websites, how different recipe websites look different ways, and we talked about what does it mean to rate something, and what does it mean to write a review, and who are the kinds of people that are doing this, and how much information do you need in order to make a decision. So they found a different website, food.com, and food.com has this recipe called Mom's Chocolate Cupcakes. Mom's Chocolate Cupcakes got a far better rating for more people. More people liked Mom's Chocolate Cupcakes. So they decided to make those. It was delicious, my students decided. We made some sample cupcakes, which you can see in the upper right of your whiteboard. And actually we're going to sell them on May 4th. So hopefully it will be a super successful bake sale. But this is really the kind of example that we look at every day. So at YAM, we're looking at how students interact with everything online. And the beauty of this example is it's real life. It's what kids are actually looking for. It's what adults are actually looking for. And it's a perfect example of how credibility and quality really come into play every single day when they're on the web. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nathaniel, who is one of our project coordinators here at the Berkman Center.
Hello, thank you, Meredith. So Meredith gave a wonderful real-life example of what information quality means, particularly what it means to young people in the business of school or things that go about in their daily life. What I want to speak about very briefly is the empirical basis that informs much of our information quality report, which Art described very eloquently in the introduction. So what we see now on slide 7 are two things: a representation of traditional media and a representation of new media, with guideposts going in between them that describe the characteristics of each. So traditional media, we see two people reading newspapers. Obviously, this happens less now than it did in the previous system. The characteristics that describe that ecosystem, or that system, are credibility, which Meredith just contrasted nicely to information quality, and which we'll continue to elaborate on over the course of this webinar. Editorial boards. So as Laura's mentioned, to get something published, you don't need to get your content through an editorial board of peer review or a newspaper, etc. You could simply post it on a blog. Media concentration. Again, you don't need to own a printing press anymore. You can simply publish from your own platform online. And again, mass media. So one of the dominant characteristics of the previous media ecosystem was delivery, broadcast media. Things would go from an anchor on the evening news out to the masses. And of course, that's not how things really work anymore. So to work from the bottom up on new media, we see social media contrasted to new media, right? These are things like Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr that we use all the time. Diversity. So there's just a larger number of speakers overall, and correspondingly, there's a greater number of perspectives associated with those speakers. User-created content. Right? So as I said, you don't need to push things through a board. Through the context of what we do all the time in our daily lives on the internet, we're creating content, whether it's comments on news articles or short blog posts, kids creating videos. And then again, overall, the dominant characteristic and dominant theme of the new ecosystem is information quality as opposed to credibility. So some of the websites on the right, which we're familiar with, illustrate this or are emblematic of the new system, and we'll see a little bit more about those on the next slide. So here on slide 8, we see that 9.5 out of 10 youth in the country use the internet. This is a staggering number. It will probably only grow. So it basically means that all of our kids are wired, and they're using the internet. What are they doing on the internet? Below, we see the top 10 most widely used websites in the U.S. Granted, these aren't the most widely used websites by kids, but by people overall. Nonetheless, it's clear that from the types of sites that they are, the ecosystem has definitely changed, right? MSN, well, yes, that provides some sorts of conventional broadcast news, but overall, they're all Web 2.0 sites that focus on interaction, right? Look at the types of things you can do. Google is a search portal, Facebook is and Twitter are social networking sites. YouTube is a search engine as well as a platform for user-generated content. Blogger is a publishing platform, and Craigslist involves peer-to-peer exchange. So with this basis for our understanding and our notions of information quality, I'll turn to my colleague Ned Crowley, who will explain the framework that we propose in the information quality report.
Thank you, Nathaniel. So now a little bit back to theory. So we're going to talk about our information quality framework. And we're going to start with this upper left quadrant where we're discussing in what context do youth use digital media. And we've divided it up into sort of the purposes that they're using digital media are for themselves in their personal context, with their friends in the social context, or academically in the school context. And we're finding increasingly that these contexts, the boundaries are fluid. Youth have a lot of crossover between one context and the other. So, for example, one information-related skill that might be very high quality in the social context, like being able to text message and write in text speak, a shorthand that young people, or all people use in text messaging, that may not cross over so well into the academic context where young people need to write in a more academic language. Text language might not be so appropriate. So that's an example where crossover from one context to the other may result in a low-quality information situation. On the other hand, there can be examples of positive crossover from context. So if we see young people gaming online, playing multiplayer online games in their social lives or in their personal time, that can cross over and give them skills in leadership or cooperation. So we're seeing that there is, these are fluid boundaries between these different contexts, but there is crossover in what young people are doing. Now, moving on to the bottom left quadrant, when doing our research and reviewing other studies out there, we found that it was necessary to break down youth experience of digital media into a process. The three basic steps of this process are information seeking, evaluating, and creating or sharing information. Now, none of these are exhaustive or mutually exclusive. So there's different points in the process where these overlap. You can evaluate as you find, you can share, as you can search through sharing. So these are not mutually exclusive, but it's useful when doing research to think about these as separate. So we're going to give two sort of examples here that illustrate how simple or complex this information process can be. In the first example, we can imagine a young person getting a school assignment to do research on the Battle of Gettysburg in the Civil War. And the young person, as we've conducted in our research, as we found, young people always start with Google. Not always, but generally. So a young person would go to Google and type in one keyword, Gettysburg, and they would return these search results, say, Gettysburg.com, whatever that is, the Google map for Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, maybe Gettysburg College's website. And so the young person may be confused by these general results, vague results, and then try refining their search by adding a few more keywords. So at this moment, we're seeing a search, and then an evaluation of the initial results leading to another search with refined search terms. And then the young person types in Battle of Gettysburg, Civil War, and the first thing that comes up is Wikipedia. So maybe the young person has been told at school that Wikipedia is a useful place to start their research, but it's not the ultimate place where they want to end up. So they go to Wikipedia and they read through and they look for links that are useful to them as an individual according to what they like out of information. And so in our example, our young person, our hypothetical young person, arrived at this interactive map of the Battle of Gettysburg that's published by the United States Park Service and the Army. So this, perhaps our young person here really engages with visual information, with interactivity, with sounds and images. So this young person really learns more from this interactive map produced by a reputable source than maybe from the encyclopedia entry. And then, if we move from the evaluation stage into the creation and sharing stage, we have our young person embed this interactive map in a PowerPoint slide, which she can then deliver to her classmates. So here's an example of a pretty linear process from identifying an information need and searching for it, evaluating the results, and then passing on the information that she found. But more often than not, in the Web 2.0 environment, in the new information ecosystem, searching does not, or information experiences do not follow this linear pattern. Oftentimes, as many of you will have experienced, you'll be pushed information on your social networks, such as Facebook or Twitter. So you can imagine a young person's friend on Facebook posting some news item. And imagine that this young person is, a critical thinker and says, I don't know if I necessarily trust that news item or if I trust the friend that posted it. And so they go and they may follow up on that with a search. So they may go from Facebook to Google, for example, or Wikipedia, and do a search, and go through this process, again, or another process where they're looking through better sort of instances of this information, trying to fill out this story that they were pushed initially. Now, if our young person is particularly creative or enterprising, they might then go and make a remix video where they piece together the information that they found across the web according to their likes and their passions and their interests, put it onto a YouTube video, put it out there for the world to see, and then share it back on Facebook. So here we have a circular process where there are multiple points of entry or exit, depending on what the user's preferences or passions, interests, and skills are. So you can see that it's useful to think about this as a search, evaluate, and create process, but in reality we're seeing these steps interconnect in complicated ways. So returning to our framework, I'm going to hand it back to Nathaniel, who is going to discuss some of these other elements that we've found to be important.
Nathaniel, maybe before you continue, I just monitor here the chat room, and there are two interesting questions that I want to briefly clarify. The first one being, what is the difference between information quality and credibility? And second, what do we actually mean by information quality? So let me briefly clarify that. Credibility is a concept that was developed actually in the analog world, became very prominent in the aftermath of World War I, where the main concern was that a relatively limited number of speakers, and that is newspapers and other media outlets, would be manipulated for obvious reasons and would shape public opinion in an appropriate way. So credibility as a notion was very much based on a few assumptions. One of the assumptions was there are only a limited number of people who actually have access to mass media and can have the power to shape public opinion. And the second assumption was that the selection process now from the readers or users' perspective was relatively straightforward, which is, well, you're exposed to a piece of information if you open up the newspaper in the morning. So credibility as a concept does not take into account how you actually search for information, how you interact for information, because these are questions that you didn't have to deal with when the very idea and notion of credibility was developed. Now fast forward, as Ned and the other speakers described, we live in a much more diverse information ecosystem with many, many speakers where the question of power has to be reformulated, where the access conditions are very, very different, and moreover, where actually the quality ultimately of a piece of information that you get as a user is shaped by many different things, including, for instance, your ability to search and find an information that is of value to you in a given context. But then also, of course, it's shaped by the way you use the information in an interactive way nowadays. Again, a feature that we didn't have in the past. So we try to reformulate and expand this notion of credibility and use the term information quality instead to put emphasis on these new qualities, including new characteristics of the information ecosystem, including the process of information-seeking behavior, of evaluation, and the feedback loop of information creation, user-created content was mentioned, on the skills to make sound quality judgments. How do we define information quality? That's one of the hardest questions. There are many, many attempts to define it. We see it first and foremost as something that is relatively subjective and that is highly contextual. So we use kind of a pragmatic approach here to describe it roughly as fit for use, something that serves your information need in a given context and is helpful to you. With that, I turn over to Nathaniel.
Sure. Thank you, Ori. So the quadrant in the information quality framework that we left off at was what causes differences. So as Ori just described, credibility, or now as we term it, information quality, is situated in the process of use and of going through the actions that Ned described, finding, evaluating, sharing also, and creating information. And of course, part of the contextuality of how people use and go about these activities online are little differences, which include motivation, the purposes for doing a search, right? Of course, homework is one reason to do a Wikipedia search, leisure is another to do a YouTube search, or vice versa. Generation and time. So, of course, it's basic to our report, but it's important to emphasize that youth and adults have different characteristics with regards to these actions. Gender, an important variable, as are SES, and age. So just a few more useful examples. So take gender, right? So we found in the course of doing this literature review that boys enter more search terms before they start browsing, while girls actually input fewer search terms and then proceed more linearly through the results of their search, while boys may go back and use more words to come up with a new search term. Also with gender, we've worked with colleagues that work with girls and other young people in the user-generated content space. So specifically girls who she works with put videos on YouTube. And she's told us that, girls often lack the motivation to put their content on YouTube because they view much of what's on YouTube as low quality. So that's their preference. They don't like YouTube, even though it's the most widely used platform for video. Another easy example of differences in search are whether or not kids use natural language versus using a lot of Boolean operators in search terms. So those are some of the variables. And then to close out the framework, we move to the top quadrant, quality from whose perspective. So this simply enables us to round out the framework and emphasize that different types of people have different processes with which they interact with information online and different contexts in which they use them. So overall, they have different approaches and different ideas of what quality are. Some of the most notable actors in our report that we like to think about are youth, educators, and adults. So you could think of several examples. Take, for instance, the death of a high-profile person, like the death of Osama bin Laden. Adults, or an educator, may have found out about Osama bin Laden's death through the New York Times website, and then proceeded deeper into the site to find out more about the story or about the context of the U.S.'s actions abroad, or related parts of the story. Whereas a student or a young person might have found out about the event through a social network like Facebook, and then immediately proceeded to YouTube to maybe look for coverage of the event, look for pundits or opinions to discuss the event. In short, this basically rounds out the framework and emphasizes that both the process and the context of use used by different actors end up creating different notions of quality. So now that we've discussed the framework, we'd like to take a deeper dive into the relationship between information quality and news, and I will turn to the Youth and Media Project Manager, Sandra Cortesi.
Hi, hello everyone. So thank you, Nathaniel. I wanted to stop at this moment for a second and see if there are any kind of clarification questions with regards to our information quality framework. If you have a question, you can either raise your hand in the participants box, or you can simply write your question into the chat field. If not, we will continue with a couple of observations and questions up for discussion that are more related to news. So, anyone? A lot to digest, I think. Okay, so let's see some of our questions here that we have been asking ourselves at the Youth and Media Lab. So question one would be, what's the role of social networking sites, and what's the role of friends and peers? So imagine, for example, here this story, where you see a Facebook feed of someone, and there is a friend posting a link about a current news event on Facebook. So what we know from focus groups, as was described at the beginning, many kids access news when they see the news on Facebook. So that's our first question. What's the importance of social networking sites and friends when it comes to news? So looking at the next slide, here we see a very common news website. It's the Boston.com website. So thinking about young people that actually access news websites online, traditional news websites like this one of the observations we made while talking to kids, to young people, was they are having actually a hard time realizing what's editorial content and what's advertisement. This goes for regular websites like this one. For example, here you see a Dunkin' Donuts advertisement, as well as, for example, Google. Many times when we ask young people, do you know where sponsored links are on Google, they would not know the answer. So how can we support young people finding higher quality information, especially when it comes to news? And one of the third observation that we have been looking into here at the Use the Media Lab is the role of video. As we know, YouTube as a search engine as well, it's getting more and more important, and kids are turning more and more to YouTube. Also to access news, here, for example, you see a political remix video. So what's the role of video? How do you see it? What's the role of images as well, and how can we address the notion that younger people prefer video over traditional websites like, let's say, the New York Times? So those are three of our main questions that we have been looking into, and with this we would like to open it up for discussion. Let us know what you are working on or what you think about this, or maybe you now have additional questions. Thank you. So again, if you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand where it says participant, click on the hand that you see there, and we can give you a microphone so you can talk, or you can write that question into the chat bar below the participants window.
In the meantime, let me just expand a little bit on what Sandra just used as an example. I think the fact that young users typically access news by way of visiting and looking at their friends' posts on Facebook and other social networking sites, I think that's a great illustration of how deeply our information ecosystem and the news ecosystem has changed as we move from analog to digital. And of course, this is highly relevant from an information quality perspective because I heavily rely as a user in this constellation on judgments by my peers. And I think we haven't fully understood actually the relevance of such peer recommendations, and also not really thought through some of the potential implications. Of course, there is research on echo chamber effects and the like, but I think there is a real concern that if we only read what our best friends on Facebook are linking to, that we will miss important information, that we have not necessarily a balanced view on the world at large, or that we don't develop a kind of a broad view on especially controversial issues. Our hope is that the reframing the debate from the notion of credibility to information quality opens up the space to ask such questions as opposed to just narrowly focusing on is an information accurate or not. So I just want to highlight this particular example, the Facebook example, as one case where both the structural shifts in the ecosystem become highly relevant and highly visible, as well as the need for a conceptual reformulation of credibility. I think we have now, I get the signal that we have two questions, and maybe I don't know whether it's a hand or a chat. So we have two questions. Maybe you can read it because I have blindfolded here on my screen.
Sure. So one question is, can you talk more about how your research applies to curriculum development? And the second is, what about the utility of information in the context of information quality?
All right, let's perhaps go in this order. And a great illustration of one of the curriculum models we've developed will be presented by Sandra.
So here you see one of our modules that we have developed at the Youth and Media Lab. It was actually developed by young people being here at the Youth and Media Lab. So as you see, I don't know how many of you know this image, but let me change quickly the color here so that you actually see something. So this one here is the original image of the Vancouver riots, and as you can see here, you see the kissing couple. So one of the modules that one of the young Youth and Media Lab members created was a module about these riots and the different perspectives that you can take on if you would see this image or any part of this image. So on the right side, for example, here you can see just a policeman, and you can see here, for example, just a kissing couple, or the kissing couple with someone looking at the couple. So what we did with this module is give the different images to different groups of students and made them write a narrative what the story behind this image could be. And then they came again together and realized that because they have just a limited piece of information, kind of lower quality in that sense because they didn't have the full picture, that they did not understand what the full story was. Together with them different news articles about the riots, and they realized that they still did not have the full picture because the part that was missing was the story from the perspective of the couple itself. So we also watched this at the end, and they really had this moment of, wow, now I actually understand the story. So it made them think about future events, that it's okay if you just see one image or hear one story, but if you are curious enough about the story, that you should look further into it, and through that get a better picture of it and have, in a sense, a higher quality of the information because you have the full picture, or at least a better one. So that's, for example, one of the modules. We have other modules that address this notion of information quality. One is, for example, a little bit more about Facebook and the content you post on it, and also looking at it, what, for example, for a young person seems very high quality, and this person posts at a given moment, the parent or the teacher might dislike and think it's lower quality because they think it's not appropriate to post on Facebook. So what are discussions around those perspective differences that you should prepare to have? That's another module. So to this, I guess back to Urs, who would like to add a few things.
Well, it's only a very brief comment in response to one of the questions in the chat, but I think it's a good point to make this or to clarify that. The question was actually, what about the utility of information as a particular aspect of information quality? And the way that Sandra just describes how we structured the exercises, indeed, our view on information quality, as we mentioned before, is a relative one, generally speaking. So we indeed believe that depending on your information needs, on your particular background, your prior knowledge, the context in which you're seeking for information, the notion of quality itself changes significantly. I could give you a few examples if you just pick one. For instance, if you undergo an emergency surgery, your information needs in terms of how comprehensive should be the disclosure of the risks of this surgery. That quality of that information differs very much from a context where the same individual has a surgery that is scheduled. So that's just an illustration of how much context matters when we make judgments about the value of information. Now, therefore, the emphasis in the module that Sandra just presented is really on stimulating conversations about different perspectives on a same piece of information, as well as in the example of riots. What happens if we have different angles, say, on a news story, and to just raise the awareness that these perspectives matter a lot, and that our quality judgment heavily depend also and are influenced by the particular choice of a perspective, often made by others. That is the main purpose here. Now, that being said, we do not argue, however, that's equally important, that information quality can be anything. I think the main idea here is, first of all, there are quality minima. Sometimes these quality minima are defined by particular standards. Take the case of health information, where health professionals would agree on certain minimum quality standards. Sometimes these quality minima are also defined by legal standards and legal norms. Take the example of the disclosure of financial information and the requirements, for instance, you will find in financial market regulations. And sometimes these notions of quality are defined by social norms, by, let's say, a family that would agree on, what kind of TV program do we want to watch together in the evening, what do we consider to be not good for ourselves and for my children, as an example of kind of the social norms mechanisms to agree on certain quality standards. And utility, of course, is one of these quality criteria, and that context that matters too. Sometimes, especially in cases where information quality or information serves a particular function, then it's easier actually to agree as a community on its quality. For instance, if I'm asking, how do I get here from 23 Everett Street in Cambridge to Harvard Square, it's pretty straightforward to determine the quality of information I get if I ask someone on the street by the fact whether, if I follow the description, whether I will end up at Harvard Square or say at Porter Square, right? So there are areas, especially where information is more functional, serves functional purposes, where we can make more objective quality statements. So that would be the response to this important question of utility of information. Thank you.
So there is actually an additional question in the chat asking about mobile penetration, and if because of this more and more getting mobile, if students spend less time accessing and reading news than they would do on the laptops. And the difficult thing is there is actually not much research with regards to that. But one of the arguments you could also make is because they have their mobile phones always with them, you could also say that the options they have, or the moments during a day they could technically access news, are higher than just with their laptops. So it's unclear if it's a negative or a positive thing, at least from my personal perspective. But I think it's a very good point that we should do more research and look further into it.
There's another chat about it. Right, so then there's also another very interesting question, just to repeat it out loud. Is there data that speaks to whether or not youths find and explore academic interests by way of their casual or social interests, i.e. interest in media production via initial activity in gaming? So that's a fascinating question, and still a subject of much research. I don't think we have a convincing amount of quantitative data, broad-based quantitative data, but there are certainly rich anecdotes, I think, that speak to the fact that that is true and to other lessons that we can learn from it. So, for example, there's a high school in San Diego called High Tech High, where their motto about video games, supposedly at least, is you can play them if you build them. So the school caters to a certain type of student, right, maybe more interested in doing rather than a certain type of passive learning that's traditional. And then co-cultivates, social interest in gaming along with academic interest in gaming. We've also spoken to teenagers in focus groups. Oftentimes mods or, how you modify a video game and how you hack a video game. That's a major topic that comes up often. And at times, I think that feeds a certain interest in science or technology in school, but most of the time that wasn't on the tips of kids' tongues when they were talking about it. So that's certainly a rich area for further explanation, or further research, rather. But the question also just points to the interesting topic of what crossover between the social, personal, and academic are, which is where the lit review also leaves off. So without thinking too much about it, I would simply say that sometimes the crossover isn't just in terms of interest, but skills and processes, right? So if you record yourself making a skateboarding video, those skills can be harnessed in the classroom, even if skateboarding itself isn't the topic of further investigation.
I mean, we're about to wrap up here, but I really want to highlight that particular point that Nathaniel just made. One of the really big findings of the lit review, I believe, is how much the social context matters when it comes, and also the personal context matters when it comes to building the skills for information seeking, evaluation, and content creation. And the big challenge we see from an educational perspective is really to create interfaces between these social and personal contexts with the more formal educational context, and to harness the potential that we see outside the classroom also for the academic work. And I'm happy to see that this is a conversation that is well underway, with lots of experimentation, but at the same time, as we hear from kids all the time, much more work needs to be done. Of course, we also have to rethink the policy framework. To ban YouTube access at schools is not supportive of this kind of transfer of skills from the social and personal to the academic context, and many more examples could be added. A question to my colleagues: do we have more questions, or are we approaching the end?
We just got a new one. Do traditional credibility criteria still apply to online information sources?
A very good question. So there are about over 70 different quality criteria, and it's a very hard question to answer whether all of them, or as to what extent all of them, still apply to the online environment. Some of them clearly do, and in some cases, take, for instance, the example of timeliness of information as one quality criteria. We can even see an improvement as we move from analog to digital. In other cases, again, reliability, I'm not so sure. So that's still, the jury is still out on determining for each of these 70 plus quality criteria how first they translate from one context to another, from analog to offline. From analog and offline to digital and online. And second, what the qualitative change is that we see. But an excellent question, and as I noticed at the beginning, we're at a starting point, I think, of a long conversation involving many stakeholders, including, of course, educators, but also, importantly, journalists, which in my view play a crucial role in that space. So with that, I may turn over to our colleagues at McCormick Foundation, and let me just once again thank the McCormick Foundation for making this work possible. It's been a great privilege to work with you and to have your support. And thanks also to everyone participating in this webinar. It's been a great experience, and we're looking forward to being in touch with all of you via chat, Twitter, Facebook, email, or my preferred version in person at some point somewhere. Thank you. I think you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to thank everyone for participating. My name is Janet Liao. I'm a program officer here at the McCormick Foundation in the journalism program. We really appreciate everyone's interest in these topics and look forward to continuing the conversation with everybody. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.